A very good morning, team, and welcome back. EURUSD has started to drop in towards the downside since as of the Asian session, and we're looking for further downside today on EURUSD in the form of further short positions. Looking at the weekly time frame, we can still see that last week we got a weekly bearish candle close. Nothing much has changed, to be honest, besides me still looking for further downside towards these lower wicks and to take out the equal lows here on the weekly time frame as well. Going to the daily time frame, we can still see that the overall daily internal trend here is bearish as well, as we've been creating lower low, lower low, lower high, and we're now looking to confirm that this is a lower high by again looking for another drop off in towards the downside, taking out the equal lows and pushing in towards this overall liquidity low as well, after rejecting the monthly and the free monthly open. Now, last week on Friday, we had finally some inflation news which caused EURUSD to push up higher. However, for me, this was just a temporary push up, as I still look to see EURUSD drop down further in towards the downside throughout the rest of this week. Now, this week we have a lot of Euro news, but the main news that is now navigating, or let's say, pushing the market in a certain direction, is obviously the trade deal talks between China and the United States. Now, China and the US will be meeting this week, and that has caused overall the risk on sentiment to improve, causing crypto to push up higher, but for example also the Australian dollar and New Zealand dollar to push up higher as well. However, this trade deal should be good for the US dollar as well, hence I'm still bearish on EURUSD, and I will be looking for further potential downside. Now, for myself here on the 4-hour time frame, I'll be looking for potential short positions once we start breaking the 4-hour fractal low. So what I now want to see is a 4-hour fractal low break, and then on the lower time frame, I'll be looking to skill into some potential positions. As for now, we still have this kind of like small area of demand slash this imbalance candle over here in control and preventing price from pushing down lower. But once that breaks, I'll be looking for some short positions for another drop off of around, 60 pips to around 70 pips. So that's what I'm looking for on EURUSD. To be honest, that's what needs to happen before looking for shorts. It does already look good, but obviously it is Monday, so we still could see some manipulation. There's still some liquidity open slightly higher, for example above this bullish candle over here, or even for example above this little bump in the road here. So there is potential for EURUSD also to take out those highs and then for example drop off in towards the downside. Do keep that in mind, hence why I would only be looking for EURUSD short position once this overall 4-hour fractal low breaks, and then for example we retest the weekly open, and then we can look for a short position. So that's what I'm looking for on EURUSD. Going into the dollar index, we can see that the dollar index has been consolidating relatively heavily, to be honest. The dollar index, not much has changed, guys. Not much has changed. This week, again, we have those trade talks between China and the US. Trump has already announced that there are deals on the table, and this has improved the overall sentiment surrounding the dollar. Again, here on the daily time frame, nothing much has changed, with this still being your daily area of demand, the overall sell for the big buy up. Here above, we have equal highs, so equal descending highs in the form of liquidity. If we look at the 4-hour time frame, we can still see that we're creating a higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high, a potential higher low, and we're now looking for a new potential higher high to be established. We're well within our overall impulsive phase. On Friday, with that inflation news, we saw a fake out on the overall lows, and that could be the catalyst to continue pushing the dollar index up high. Now, for myself, again, relatively similar to EURUSD, I need to see kind of like this internal 4-hour fractal high break, and then I'll be happy to look for those further longs there on the dollar index to see it pushing up higher. Otherwise, there is still potential for another little drop off, but this will definitely be kind of like the confirmation within this, let's say, range, because yeah, the dollar is ranging at the moment. It is moving sideways, so be careful. Don't think, hey, I can get into any positions at the moment, but that's my personal opinion. Wait for the overall fractal higher to break, and then we'll be looking for longs. Otherwise, there is still potential for it just to kind of like chop around, and then you're just going to be stuck in positions, hating yourself. So that's what I'm looking for on the dollar index. Now, going into GPUSD, I'm bearish on GPUSD. I'm looking for those short positions. Nothing much, again, has changed. Last week, we saw another bearish candle close there on Friday after seeing a strong push in towards the highs, in towards supply, taking out some internal liquidity. Now, for GPUSD, I'm still looking for those short positions. Looking here at the daily time frame, we have, again, a very, very simple but effective kind of like breakdown of what we can see here. So what we have is the bearish leg from this high in towards this low. So this is your bearish impulse in towards downside, facilitating a break of structure. Within the overall pullback, we wait for liquidity to get taken once, caused an initial dump down, but not enough momentum, came up higher to the second point of liquidity, free monthly open as well, which is the purple line here at the top, and then from there we started selling off. Now, very similar to EURUSD, we can clearly see that GPUSD is bearish in market structure. The immediate market structure is very, very bearish. We see here that we have a breakdown. Here again, we have the overall break of structure down. Here again, we had another break of structure down, and now we have this here as my swing low, this here as my swing high. GPUSD came back up in towards this internal liquidity high, this point here, which is kind of like trendline liquidity on these descending highs. We came into the monthly and the free monthly open, and from there we've been heading down lower. Immediate market structure is also bearish. Sentiment around the pound is also not optimal at the moment, so we're still looking for those further short positions on GPUSD following what is the overall daily impulsive phase, as after what was once the daily impulsive phase down, we had the overall pullback phase up, and now again we're in the impulsive phase down. And what you want to do in the impulsive phase, you want to follow the overall order flow, and what you can there see is that the overall buy before the sell here in control, and now again buy before the sell here is in control. So we're looking for further short positions within that buy before the sell. So looking to see GPUSD sell off down lower. Now, to see or to look for, let's say, immediate entries, I'm not going to lie, it is relatively difficult. Not the cleanest of price action. What was nice is that we came back up to take out a lot of liquidity. Taking that out, I was preferably last week seeing a take of this high, but then again, what happens, we engineer some liquidity here, and then we took that out with the news, and now we've been selling off again. So I'll be looking for further downside once the dollar index confirms that it wants to head up higher with that overall fractal structure shift, and that will then become like the signal for myself as well that GPUSD might be ready then to continue its overall sell-off down lower. Going into AUDUSD, we can see that AU has been pushing up higher, obviously following the overall kind of like risk on sentiment with the news that China and the US are going to be establishing a trade deal. The Australian dollar has appreciated heavily in value. You can see, for example, AUDCAD gapped up higher over the weekend. Also, if you look at, for example, a GPAUD, has also been selling off very, very, very hard in towards the downside. So what happens when these kind of like trade deals are announced is that you see that the Australian dollar, the New Zealand dollar, the Canadian dollar, relatively, because the Canadian dollar was kind of like under influence of let's say, cancelled trade deal with the US, but especially the Australian dollar and the New Zealand dollar, but also, for example, crypto and equity markets, those are definitely pumping based on the news that there is going to be a trade deal. So when you then look at an AUD, you need to play it smart, see what's going to be said. Obviously, this trade news talk has now pushed AU into where? Into a area of supply and the overall liquidity high that we were looking for last week. So from here, yes, we could now potentially see a short start to play out. Keep in mind, maybe if we see the 4-hour fractal break and we see the dollar index break up higher, then we could get that short position. But again, AUD is kind of like one of the most bullish pairs out there at the moment against the dollar. And I would then, for example, say, hey, let's look at those EuroUSD and those GPUSD short positions as opposed to an AU or an NU, as those are heavily linked to those trade talks and the overall sentiment that there is within the markets, okay? So keep that in mind when trading AU. But if we do see that for a fractal break, then we could look for those potential short positions. Going into USD also looks good for further downside. Obviously, again, over the weekend, we pushed up higher in towards the supply zone. So now what you're pretty much just going to be wanting to wait for is the 4-hour fractal low break. Obviously, we saw one last week as well. But as I mentioned, when you are trading within an area of consolidation, guys, do not be too aggressive with your stop loss because the markets can just continue to manipulate. So what happens when you place your very tight stop loss here, you just see the market can still manipulate, still tap into that supply zone. So if you take an initial position, you want to be kind of like putting your stop loss, let's say over here above supply, or maybe even over here, getting into initial positions. Because if you look at the higher time frame being, let's say, the daily, then you see, it's actually not that small of a stop loss, and there is still a lot of room to target. Now, I get a lot of people saying, but how can you be profitable with such a big stop loss? It's the most ridiculous thing I've maybe ever heard. So maybe ask ChatGPT and get your brain checked, because guys, you can be extremely profitable with those bigger stop losses and then learn how to scale in once momentum comes. Because as you can see here on NZUSD, there is no momentum yet. So why would you take an extremely tight stop loss if you see that the market is just kind of like consolidating? So take a bigger stop loss, don't stress too much about the position, and then once momentum starts coming in, then you use the tight stop loss, for example, okay? NU still looks good for a potential short position, but it needs some momentum and the dollar needs to break up in towards the upside. Now, going into USDCAD pushed up higher over the weekend and on Friday, but it's now actually dumping in towards the downside. So the initial dump on the Canadian dollar, so pump on USDCAD, came from where? Well, it came from the news that, again, there was no trade deal between Canada and US. Don't quote me on that, but I think that was what I read. Still need to kind of like update my overall fundamentals over the weekend. But we can now see again that USDCAD has started to push down a little bit lower. Now, USDCAD is not my favorite position because of the positioning at the moment. If you look at where we are currently trading at, you can clearly see that we're trading at a bump in the road here, which is major liquidity. So what happens is that when you take out major liquidity, the market is likely to move towards major liquidity before making its next big move. So for example, here you have major liquidity, as this is the first low of, let's say, this trend line liquidity. So you would then, for example, prefer here and then, for example, look for long again instead of, still aggressively scaling in, because the probability of these kind of positions are getting lower and lower. So USDCAD is not an ideal long at the moment after taking out that daily bump in the road / liquidity / swing high liquidity whatsoever. So there could still be a little bit more manipulation from USDCAD before any further upside. I mean, if you do trade it, then use a wider stop loss. Obviously, I'm not looking for shorts on this yet. I would only stick to pretty much longs. Though it's not kind of like in the ideal position at the moment, I would say. Going into USD Swiss, let's have a look at that. So USDCHF is stalling, guys, stalling. As I mentioned last week, this is a nice potential short position, but obviously over the weekend with those trade talks, the Swiss franc has weakened quite a bit. Still fundamentally very bearish USDCHF, or let's say the Swiss is very strong, not necessarily very bearish USD Swiss, and NZD Swiss or CAD Swiss is much more bearish fundamentally. But we can see that USDCHF is currently consolidating. It's waiting for its next big move. Not a position I'm going to remain in. I got out to break even on this thing, and I'll be waiting for new renowned momentum and to see where the trade talks lead us. But I think there are better opportunities in the markets this week, for example, on EU or on GU. So wait for this to kind of like break out in either direction and then maybe get in. If we do start breaking up again, then you could look for these descending highs to get taken out. If we do start breaking down again, then you can start looking for those potential short positions once again. Though, that is pretty much that. USDJPY. So UJ has continued again in towards the highs, following the over impulsive phase. As I mentioned last week, this was a no-brainer long position. I've been saying it every single day last week, long. So congratulations if you took those. Again, I saw some people going short, but too bad. Really disrecommend that. Just follow the over momentum in the immediate form, guys. After liquidity gets taken, push up. Liquidity taken, push up. So now we've come towards the overall highs. So now here it's dangerous to still go for long. So I would definitely kind of like stay out of UJ and wait for it to either just continuous leg up and then wait for the reaccumulation, liquidation, and then look for longs again. So if you're in longs from, let's say, here or here, then obviously you can stay in your long position. But do not get into longs over here, literally at the break of structure line. Wait for it to kind of like impulse, reaccumulate, and then, for example, look for longs after the liquidation. That's what I would personally do. And then, of course, we have gold. Now, what's gold doing, guys? Gold is still ranging. Looking at the 1 hour time frame, we can still see that we're kind of like stuck well within this range. So I'm just going to extend the range and wait for either the low or the high to get swept. And then once that gets taken, then we can look for potential long or for a potential short. Because at the moment, the market is just moving in between 25 and the 75% range bound. So then you can pretty much look for longs from the 25% region and for shorts from the 75% region. As simple as that. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. By the way, I have an idea that I'm currently working on. If you guys might want to follow my trades in the form of a kind of like private group where I share my exact positions with stop loss and TP. If you would be interested in that, I'm working on something. Let me know in the comment section down below if you would be interested in receiving the exact trades that I take. I'll maybe start working and finalizing that. Without further ado, guys, have an amazing day and speak soon. Inside Discord, link in the description of this video.